Chapter 6. The next morning was bright but cold. Martin could feel the autumn coming in. He got up early, made some phone calls, and after looking in on his uncle, he was on his way into town by 9 o'clock, having made an appointment with Merlin Griffiths, the solicitor, for 9:30. He tried not to think too much about his Uncle Paul as he manoeuvred the car down the twisting roads towards town. If he did have a sense of the inevitable end, he refused to indulge himself in it. Uncle Paul was his only living close relative, but he had been remote from him for years. Paul's age, his preoccupations, his political sympathies were alien, belonging to another era. At the same time, he had always seemed indestructible, a kind of barrier between Martin and aspects of his own family history, his parents' death, for example, into which he had never wanted to probe too deeply. When Uncle Paul died, there would be questions he would have to face. Miserborn was one of those small Welsh towns centred around a market square that had once been pretty enough, but had allowed too much indiscriminate development. Now a Tesco's bulked over the Victorian town hall, and a multi-storey car park jostled the collection of pubs that clustered around a memorial statue to the First World War. Waterman Street, where Merlin Griffiths' place was located, was an elegant early Victorian square with large three-storey houses that had been converted into offices. He found number 15 painted grey with white trim and made his way onto the ground floor. There was a brass plate that informed him the solicitor's office was 2 floors farther up. He took the stairs. "You never climb. Sorry." The voice came from a tall man in a pinstripe suit. He had a long face that was slightly too lean. He was fiddling with the computer on the large oak front desk. "Merlin Griffiths?" "Of course." "Martin James. Sorry, there was no one else to welcome you. I had to give Gwyneth, my receptionist, a morning off. Her mother is ill." Martin followed him into a large room at the back of the building. It was surprisingly modern. Bare board floors, comfortable armchairs, and a large pine table that served as a desk. The solicitor motioned him to a chair and sat down opposite him. "I'm younger than you expected." Martin didn't deny it. He thought the solicitor must be a few years younger than he was, perhaps more. At the same time, there was a deftness about his manner that impressed him. "I inherited the business from my father, who retired last year," Merlin Griffiths said. "He still comes in a day or so a week. I don't think he likes the changes, though. But you are Merlin Griffiths." There was a slight smile. The solicitor scratched his chin. He seemed to be in competition with Hugh Grant for deferential charm. "To be precise, I'm the 3rd Merlin Griffiths to run this business. Now, how can I help?" Martin told him that his Uncle Paul had insisted that he see him. So here he was. "You've no idea what this is directly about?" "Family trust, I suppose," Martin said. He saw no need to go into the history of estrangement between himself and his uncle. The solicitor probably knew most of it anyway. "It would be." Merlin Griffiths got up, went over to the old safe which occupied the far corner of the room, opened it, and came back with a stack of documents, including an old ledger and a yellowing map, which he spread out on the table in front of them. "Originally, Plas Wern Las was quite a large estate," he explained, pointing to the building in the centre of the map. "It was built 1832. By the time it came to your family some years later, it shrunk to about 100 acres in the house." "Sounds quite a lot to me," Martin said. "I had no idea it was anything like that." Of course, he remembered living there with his uncle before going off to boarding school, but that had been a long time ago. Even smaller now. He's down to about 30. Of course, the murder didn't help matters. What murder? Sorry, Merlin Griffiths said quietly. I assumed you knew. I don't know anything other than the fact that Uncle Paul took over the management of everything after my parents died 30 years ago, Martin said. We stayed in the house for a while before I went away to school. He tried to shut out the memories of frigid days and nights in the blue bedroom in the front of the house, the darkness and the lack of company. In the car crash? Yes. I'm sorry about that too. Merlin Griffiths busied himself with the map. Then he spoke again. Plas Wern Las is a fine place. In my opinion, one of the best Regency houses in Wales. They then sat in silence in the large bright room, its refurbished bareness giving nothing away. Martin thought about how different they were, although they were not that far apart in age. In comparison to him, Merlin Griffiths was very well connected to his background. He seemed comfortable with it. He was even better informed about the history of Martin's own family than he was himself. His Uncle Paul's illness was forcing him to face aspects of his own past that he had refused to acknowledge for a long time. All through his university years, for example, he had pushed Plas Wern Las and its history to the back of his mind, and afterwards it had not seemed relevant. There were times when he'd wanted nothing to do with it, and had even put the money from it into a savings account. That had come in handy in the last year. And now things were changing. He no longer had the option of ignorance. The murder, he said, after a while. Henrietta James, your great-aunt. She was found hacked to death in the drawing room of Plas Wern Las in 1952. I see. There seemed nothing else to say except for the obvious fact that he was ill-informed about his own family. I don't think you do. The solicitor picked up the traces of an argument. Not yet. It was a notorious affair at the time and probably still affects its value. The police arrested a local man, William Davis, a deaf-mute. They held him for 3 days and brought him to trial with a signed confession. In the end, it was left to the Crown Court to dismiss the charges on the ground he obviously wasn't up to composing a confession like that. Did they ever find who did it? Not to my knowledge, but everyone who was staying there at the time came under suspicion, of course. Just about everyone who knew your aunts, in fact. Aunts? Merlin Griffiths looked up from the map again and rubbed his chin. Sorry, didn't I say? There were 2 aunts, neither of them married. Very definite characters in their day. This is quite a lot for me to take in, Martin said. He was trying not to feel overwhelmed. He pointed at the ledger which contained the cuttings. Do you think I could borrow that? Afraid not. It's the original. But anyway, that's not why your uncle sent you to me. No? No. We had an offer. We? The trust. I do realize this is a lot to absorb. I'll take it slowly. Your aunts left Plas Wern Las in trust to your father. He must have been a favourite. Your uncle was one of the trustees. These days, the trustees are your Uncle Paul, my father, and me. And you are the sole beneficiary. That's why you get the cheques. The sole beneficiary? Me? This was more than Martin was expecting. He'd always assumed that he'd shared whatever money there was with his uncle. That doesn't mean you get all the money at once, of course. Why didn't Uncle Paul tell me before? Why did he have to wait till he's almost dying? Merlin Griffiths took his time. You do have to understand, It took some time to persuade your uncle to let Plas Wern Las, and even now the current tenants have no security beyond a short-form tenancy. He is very conservative. Tell me something I don't know, Martin said. He felt angry, shut out. Even if he did feel some sympathy with him because he was obviously dying, he still felt Uncle Paul should have told him sooner. Should have been more open with him about everything. He always thought it was quite sufficient for you to receive a small allowance until you were ready to understand everything. Like murder? Not exactly. What was the offer? Merlin Griffiths walked over to Martin's side of the desk. It was from a new technology company called Western Winds. They wanted to buy the place and use it as the headquarters for a windmill farm. Wanted? Your uncle was adamant that we should turn them down, despite the fact there was a lot of money involved. So we did. Now, I suppose he wants you to at least know about it. How much money was it? $750,000 initially, with the possibility of more later, depending on the success of supplying the national grid. And he persuaded you to turn it down? Didn't he think I should have been consulted? Frankly, his attitude was that as the trustees, we are the ones empowered to make the decision. And he wanted to keep Plas Wern Las in the family. Even if I didn't want it? Do you? I don't know, Martin said. I haven't even been there since I was a boy. And perhaps he persuaded the trust to make the right decision. Martin didn't know exactly how he felt at the moment. All of a sudden, his past seemed to be catching up with him, and he wasn't sure how he was going to deal with it. He hadn't thought much about the death of his parents in years. He didn't know anything about his aunts. There was a whole area that he tried to keep as numb as he could. Now it was breaking through into the present, and he was trying to keep a tight hold on himself. He looked up and could see Merlin Griffiths watching him with concern. There's a hell of a lot to think about, he said after a while. Are you sure I can't borrow that ledger? Merlin Griffiths looked at him and explained that although he couldn't let the original records out of his sight, he could certainly make copies and send them to him. Besides, he had another client to see in a few minutes. In the circumstances, Martin decided to make the best of it, and because he was intent on returning to London that day, gave his solicitor his address before leaving. When Martin got outside the solicitor's office, the day was still bright, but it was getting cloudy. Martin confirmed to Merlin Griffiths that he had to get back to London as soon as he could, but he had some questions for his uncle first. Don't rush into anything, was almost the last thing the solicitor had said. Then he reaffirmed his offer to get his secretary to copy the rest of the newspaper cuttings and send them to Martin in London.